What's up, Psychonauts? Today we're going to talk about DMT. So I had been away from YouTube for a while and I hadn't been tripping at all since I posted my last DMT trip report back in July. And a few weeks ago, I just started trying to dabble back in DMT again. So today we're going to talk about that first DMT experience in 9 months, actually my first psychedelic experience of any kind in around 9 months. And it was a very strange trip for me. It was weirdly empty and void of content. I usually encounter entities in my trips. This one I did not. It was more or less me. It was all me. It was a very quiet, surreal, and dreamlike trip versus those buzzy, alien, hyperworld visits that I tend to have with DMT. So I had built up a lot of anxiety going into this trip because it had been so long, and that fear of the unknown, I think, just starts creeping back in. But it would soon be eliminated. So this was an unknown amount of DMT. I couldn't bother to try to measure it out, and I honestly don't know if it was a higher or a lower dose than I typically take. But here's what happened. So I get all my DMT in, and the first thing, and this is really the only content of the experience, is this overwhelming feeling that I'm not here. And it's the exact same feeling as if you were to gain spontaneous lucidity in a dream. And this actually happens to me semi-frequently. I'll be in a dream and it will just hit me. Oh wait, I'm not really here, and I'm actually, in my bed sleeping, right? But I'm still in the dream and I can still explore it and I'm still there. And this is what it felt like. I was still in my room, still laying in my bed. There weren't any super intense visuals. Everything looked very surreal, and kind of the edges of everything just looked very different. But I just realized that I'm not actually here. Like, I'm not here in my body. I'm not here laying in my bed. Like, this isn't where I actually am. Even though I could still see my room and everything, I could just tell that I wasn't actually here in this reality. It was like my senses were readjusting and I was tapping into some sort of higher dimensional nervous system. Now, this idea of, if I'm not really here brings into the question, okay, so where am I? And I honestly don't have a response for that. This wasn't necessarily like a non-dual type experience where I'm like, oh, I'm everything. I'm, the cosmic consciousness. It wasn't that. It was me in my room, and I could just tell that I wasn't actually there. And it's so bizarre. I actually kind of want to relate it to like the Matrix, as cliche as that is. Just like I could just tell. I'm like, I'm somewhere else. Like, it felt like my senses were telling me that. Like, my senses were readjusting from this like material world to like this other dimension. And my senses were telling me, no, you're not actually here. You're not actually here. But I wasn't able to actually figure out where I actually was. This trip, I honestly don't know how long this trip lasts. It's really hard to recall how long it lasted when not much happened in it. So it kind of, retrospectively, it seems like it was a pretty short trip. But I don't think it was actually short when I was laying there. But the whole time it just seems like reality is on the verge of collapsing. In the same way that if you gain lucidity in a dream, the dream starts becoming on the verge of collapsing. And this is where the idea came to mind that DMT disrupts the hallucination we call reality. I could feel my brain trying to stabilize reality. I could feel my brain fighting against the DMT, trying to keep me in this body, in this reality. It's almost like my brain was like, no, we need you here. You need to be in this body for now. Like, there's a reason you're supposed to be here. And the last thing about this experience is I felt so at peace the entire time. I mentioned that I had some anxiety going into the trip, but as soon as that DMT hit me, the anxiety was completely lifted, and I left this experience feeling very at peace. And in fact, the only thing that I wrote down after this trip was, I wrote, There is no need to fear DMT. In my experience, DMT takes the fear away, the chronic fear underlying the basis of our material lives. And this really made me think. Between the type of experience that I had and this overwhelming sense of peace that I gained, it made me make the connection between DMT and death, and DMT and near-death experiences, and why there's so many similarities there. I don't know if this is the case. I've heard evidence for it being the case, but I'm sure there's evidence against it, and nobody really knows. But it really makes me think that it's true that DMT is some sort of aid in the transfer between life and death. Like DMT somehow is involved in this process, and I don't know how. Also just makes me wonder, I wonder after all of my trips, especially considering the wild variability of DMT trips. There's so many variables going into a DMT trip that affects what type of experience you'll have. And I've had so many different kinds of experiences. There's always common threads, but again, there's so much variability, and it makes me wonder, what exactly does DMT do? What is DMT doing? What does it do? I don't know. Is it producing hallucinations? That seems like too simple of an explanation. It seems like there's something else that it's doing. And again, in this trip, and I'm not alone in this, it did not feel like there was a hallucination. In fact, there was hardly any visuals at all. Maybe part of that is that I didn't really go too deep into the close-eyed visuals this time. I was more just keeping my eyes open for some reason. But yeah, it didn't feel like my mind producing a hallucination. It felt like some other kind of thing that's happening. What is a hallucination anyway? What is a hallucination? A hallucination is seeing something that's not reality, but what is reality? We don't even know what that is. Is reality hallucination, or could it be classified as a hallucination, at least in some sense? I think at least in some sense it can be. So it's really interesting that DMT takes the hallucination away. It's so hard to put that into words for people who haven't had these experiences. So I'd love to know what you think. Let me know if you've had any similar types of DMT trips, and I'll see you soon.